History made. But what's the impact? The current U.S. president face to face with North Korea's dictator for the first time ever.
My meeting with Chairman Kim was honest, direct, and productive.
Is this a giant leap forward or a colossal mistake?
Right now, Kim Jong-un and Trump are trying to have a summit. But if you look at the North Korean state media, they're using this meeting to consolidate their power and elevate Kim Jong-un as a leader praised all over the world.
What do the young people of Seoul think about the prospect of peace with Pyongyang?
This might seem like a funny question, but one day, 5, 10 years down the road, would you work in North Korea if things opened up?
All that, plus a look at what the South Korean government really wants besides peace. Right now on a special edition of The Why from Seoul. The summit is in Singapore, but the impact is really happening places like this, cities like Seoul, South Korea. Thanks for joining us on this special edition of The Why. I'm Chance Seals. In a moment, we'll get you to Jay Struberg back in the States. He's following all the latest of what's happening on the ground at the summit. There is a lot to report there. We have been in Seoul since last week. We've been interviewing millennials here about what they're most concerned about in their lives. Little spoiler, by the way, not North Korea, not Kim Jong-un. Think jobs and money, family, dating. We're also going to bring you the stories of defectors. One of them says he knows the real reason Kim Jong-un wants to meet with President Trump so publicly. Also this hour, some incredible stories kept hidden for decades, the lasting legacy of the Korean War. But first, let's get out to Chicago. Jay, good evening.
Good evening, Chance. Thanks. Here in the U.S., the reaction has been strong following an historic day in Singapore. It's been just shy of 24 hours since the historic summit between President Trump and North Korean leader Kim Jong-un. We're even hearing tonight that more history could be made. North Korean state media reports Kim Jong-un has accepted an invitation from President Trump to visit the White House. Yesterday, the two made their mark on history by greeting each other for the very first time, extending hands in front of a row of U.S. and North Korean flags side by side. From there, a day-long summit that included an unprecedented one-on-one session with translators, a larger meeting, and a working lunch, followed by a joint statement.
And we're very proud of what took place today. I think our whole relationship with North Korea and the Korean Peninsula is it's going to be a very much different situation than it has in the past.
Mr. Trump committed to security guarantees, and Mr. Kim reaffirmed his firm and unwavering commitment to complete denuclearization of the Korean Peninsula. The joint statement was missing a couple of key details, including a timeline of when this will all happen. President Trump also announcing he'll suspend joint military exercises with South Korea, a decision that reportedly surprised both the U.S. military and South Korea's. Trump had faced pressure to bring up the multiple allegations of human rights abuses against the Kim regime during the summit. The president told Voice of America that denuclearization dominated the talks, but that human rights were mentioned without going into details. Following the summit, President Trump held a news conference with reporters, one in which he discussed Otto Warmbier, an American college student who was held in North Korea for 17 months. The student returned to the U.S. in a coma and died days later. Mr. Trump said Warmbier did not die in vain.
I think without Otto, this would not have happened. Something happened from that day. It was a terrible thing. It was brutal. But a lot of people started to focus on what was going on, including North Korea. I really think that Otto is someone who did not die in vain. I told this to his parents.
So how is all of this playing out on the Korean Peninsula? Well, let's get back to Seoul and Chance.
Jay, thanks. South Korea sees many things when it looks to the north, including economic opportunity. South Korean President Moon Jae-in reportedly gave a USB drive to Kim Jong-un when they met earlier this year. On it is the plans for economic revitalization of the North. We talked to some experts about what's really happening in North Korea now and how connecting the North to the international economy could actually benefit the entire region.
그러면은 In the future, the two Koreas are not going to be unified as one country. The border would still be there, but the railroads, roads, and electricity connections, that will be a win-win strategy for both.
Hanbam Cho is looking for that big win. He's with the Korea Institute of National Unification, hoping to transform a physically connected peninsula into one also united financially and culturally. Where to begin is a messy question. There's no uniform answer because when you talk to experts, past attempts have disintegrated in a snap. Like the factories in the Kaesong industrial complex, where North and South Koreans once worked side by side. South Korean businesses were investing big time, hiring North Korean workers at less than $200 a month. Huge money saver. Minimum wage for South Korean workers is nearly $1,500 a month. It was going well until the South suddenly pulled out in 2016 as Kim was ramping up his nuclear program.
If you look at Kaesong Industrial Complex, when that closed down, the people who owned the factories were against it closing. The governments were against it too. Because the wage level of workers was 1/3 of those of Chinese workers. The Kaesong Industrial Complex is the model for future North-South win-win.
Again, back to winning. South Korea is trying to win access and a direct land route through North Korea to the rest of Asia and Europe. Kim, on his part, first and foremost, is hoping to develop the North Korean economy and stay in power. This might require both nations to take a step of faith. Again, knowing that the diplomatic ice below their feet could crack at any minute.
If Kim Jong-un breaks a promise again, where everyone thinks now it's different, then he crosses a river that he can't come back. After this is on track, there's a very low chance that Kim Jong-un would ruin those relationships. If he does, then all those basic economic plans that North Korea has would all break apart. North Korea has come too far in a dangerous situation to do what it's done in the past.
Here's where expert opinions diverge. Does Kim Jong-un need outside investors? That's the question. Cho says yes, that the North Korean economy is in danger of collapsing now. But I asked Balbina Huang, she's a visiting professor at Georgetown, if Kim could perhaps go it alone and still survive economically.
Absolutely. And in fact, there are signs that North Korean economy is actually beginning to revive. And I think the danger is that that is exactly what Kim Jong-un is going to be able to achieve. That he is actually beginning to turn around that economy, which everybody said had failed, and was absolutely going to collapse. But people, experts, have been predicting the collapse of the North Korean economy and the state for the last 20 years, and yet it has continued.
That brings us to the question of openness. North and South Korea just could not be more different. 90% of South Koreans have the internet. There's public Wi-Fi on the subways. In the North, internet is illegal. Only the highly controlled intranet is allowed. Now imagine the prospect of businesses opening with outside investors flowing in, welcoming external corporate and political influences. So Kim now finds himself looking at a variety of economic models and deciding which one serves his interest.
And everybody says, oh, including China, why don't you follow our model? And I think North Korea, for the last 5 years, has essentially said to China, no, we are not interested in your model, because your model has actually given Chinese citizens way too much freedom. And that is exactly what North Korea does not want.
In 5 years, could we see some North Korean businesses opening up in South Korea and some South Korean businesses opening up in North Korea?
There won't be full-scale movement of labor, but in a limited sense, it's possible. South Korean businesses in North Korea, that'll be the first stage. In 5 years, there might be some North Korean business in Seoul authorized by Kim Jong-un government. A very limited number of people were selected.
Another thing to consider here is businesses in South Korea and around the world might consider, they might even want to invest in North Korea, but there's a big hurdle: sanctions. Until international sanctions are rolled back, corporations and countries would be penalized if they set up shop in the North or even invest in their projects. All right, a lot more ahead tonight on the special edition of The Why, including what millennials are thinking right now in South Korea. What are their hopes, their dreams, their fears? That's in 2 minutes on The Why. Welcome back to Newsy's special coverage of the Trump-Kim summit. I'm Chance Seals in Seoul. Korean millennials are pretty unique. Around the world, young people say they're optimistic about the future. Actually, 2/3 of millennials outside of Korea say they have high hopes for their job prospects. But here, that is not the case. In a 2014 Pew Research survey, South Korea is the only country where millennials are more pessimistic about their futures than people over the age of 50. Their views have improved over the past few years, but youth unemployment remains a major issue here, and it dominates their conversations. I went out with a group of 5 millennials this past Saturday night, sharing some Korean food and drinks, but more importantly, conversation. We wanted to get a sense of what it's like to be a young person here in Seoul. Some things being universal, some things being unique. So you said you would take me out on your usual night out on Saturday? All right, I'm excited. And I'm thirsty. Okay. All right. I'll follow you guys. It's a big time on this peninsula. Do you guys feel a lot of the weight that the rest of the world feels, or because it's been your whole life, do you think you feel it the same?
Koreans were expecting a lot on this summit and all the things that are going out around the Korean peninsula. There is a huge expectation on it.
Do you worry, like, if it doesn't go well, do you worry? Or at this point, is it kind of like, it's always been this way, so, you know, it'll just be more of the same?
Well, there are worries that it might be the same, but such reconciliation atmosphere always makes Koreans excited and makes them expected because it's a very important matter to us.
So you're hopeful?
Yeah, I'm hopeful, quite.
What's this district called?
This is actually called 뒷사리길. So
I won't ask you to spell that.
honestly, I don't know meaning to. Like, it's just called 뒷사리길. And this is a place that we're going. It's called 막걸리집.
Mak걸li?
So 막걸리, that's the traditional alcohol that I told you.
Okay.
Yep. So
that sounds good to me. Let's go, Patrick. Now this is how I remember college. Okay. So we serve it.
Oh,
they go in this. It goes in these bowls. Please do the honors.
Okay.
So is this usually the beginning of the night, or is this like the whole night? Is this? You're one and done.
It depends.
If it's a good night. Konbae.
Konbae.
So when you sit down on a Saturday night in Seoul at 20, 22 years old, what do you talk about? What's the first thing you talk about? Is it the typical, I broke up with my boyfriend or girlfriend? Or is it, oh my God, the DMZ is crazy right now?
We don't talk about this.
For you, it's just like, that's in the background, right?
That's right, but I know it sounds a little weird, but it's kind of normal status for most of the Koreans to have some disputes with North Korea.
I see.
So even though they test their nuclear programs or maybe fire their ICBM missiles, yes, we care, but it's not like the rest of the world. Oh my God, the nuclear is going crazy because we already know.
They're like, welcome to our life.
Yeah.
Ooh.
고맙습니다.
Thank you.
So we have kimchi here, and we have this seafood.
So, this is the pie, half and half, yeah. I usually go for pepperoni, but kimchi is good too. Dating life in South Korea for a young person. I'm curious how it is because the average woman in South Korea now has a baby at 30+ years old, which seems really late. Why is that? Because
it's too hard to date someone or marry someone or have a baby because we all need money and time if we want to date something.
So the unemployment rate, people see 10.8% and think, okay, you know, people need jobs. They may not realize that also affects if you're able to date, if you're able to start a family and all this. Do you worry about that?
No?
We all do. But I think the problem in Korea with the job market is that we don't have any. It's really hard to get a decent job. So you have the jobs, but.
And why is that? Because the economy, it's a big economy.
Well, I think it's up to the politicians to figure out the problems.
I don't know what this is made of. It tastes definitely fermented in a good way. It's like kind of tart, kind of creamy. What is it made of?
It's made of rice.
Rice. Okay. This might seem like a funny question, but one day, 5-10 years down the road, would you work in North Korea if things opened up? Why not?
The competition rate to become an employee in such companies is like over like more than 100 to 1.
Oh my gosh.
And like only like 20 or 30 years ago, it was like only 4 to 1 or 5 to 1. It's like a very easy entrance for people who have like high education. But nowadays, like education level and the standards of people, it all like came up so high and skyrocketed.
In the U.S., over the past year, it's been such a big deal, the Me Too movement, hashtag. Has that made an impact here?
Oh yeah, certainly. And I would say it's an ongoing phenomenon in Korean society. And well, Korea is a very conservative society comparing to U.S. And the gender role was very strict in this society.
Well, there are parking spots just for women, I noticed, that it's kind of still old-fashioned in that way.
Yeah, it is. We have the department, but it's really hard to break the traditions and change the people's think how they perceive the world.
Another question: what's gay rights like here?
I think that the sentiments are changing, but still very divided within the nation. Mm-hmm. Like political parties, they're not so much active in saying that they protect the gay rights, because in Korea, the religious parties, especially the conservative Christianity churches, they're a very big organized force that influences the Korean.
Really? Remind me of the cheers? Kombe. Thank you guys for coming out with me. Show me a Saturday night. Those are some incredibly bright and driven millennials, all attending one of the top schools in this country, Korea University. Their peers are struggling once they graduate, but they are definitely not alone. Koreans over the age of 60 actually outnumber millennials in the workforce. They're finding it tough to make enough money to actually retire. There's another issue weighing on older generations, and that's the Korean War. Some older Koreans here in the South were witnesses to massacres, sometimes involving their own families. They went unacknowledged for a long time. We met one man in his 80s who took us to the site where his father was murdered and dumped into a mass grave.
To get my father's body out from the village, 7 people came up, brought the ladder and rope, and down in the pit, one person was saying, "Help me."
Byung-soon Lee is 85 years old, but he flashes back in an instant to more than 6 decades ago. That's when he found his father and more than 70 others piled up at the bottom of a cave's pit, hidden on a tree-covered hill.
Everyone was shot to death.
Mr. Lee says one man escaped with his life.
We brought down the ladder and rope, and he said, "Thank you, thank you, thank you." He seemed startled and ran away.
It was October 1950 in Gyeongjang-gol, at the beginning of the Korean War, when Mr. Lee says neighbors were sometimes indistinguishable from the enemy. His father was a city leader when North Korean communists overtook the area. When the South Korean army recaptured control a few months later, his 49-year-old father, who had once kept the city running, even while it was occupied by the North, was labeled a traitor. What was the charge that they killed your dad for?
They called my dad a collaborator because he was in charge of the agricultural committee, and he was the vice mayor of the village. When the People's Army came over, they made him do the work. That's how you're going to feed the family.
Here's the truth. This happened in cities all over South Korea. There's even reports of U.S. troops cornering and killing 300 refugees, all moving south, considered potential threats regardless of the circumstances. It's taken decades for many of these stories to finally come out.
Those murdered in July 1950 alone were 300,000 people.
Experts say some of those killed were communist sympathizers. But historians like Ki Chul-shin say a good number, maybe even a majority, were everyday villagers who saw no other option but to cooperate when the South Korean army had retreated.
What these citizens did is what the civil servants did, what the village teachers did. They were just doing the jobs they'd always done. People who assumed the role of police under the occupation could be the collaborators, but they left, and then their family members were killed as revenge.
In 1992, the Korean government started down the path of recognition and reconciliation when it comes to these incidents, many of which have been officially deemed massacres. Special detectives have been assigned to locate and excavate remains and finally get the facts of these killings. Mr. Lee did not visit the site of his father's murder for 30 or 40 years. The blood, the bodies, the bullet wounds on that survivor's face, it was still too fresh. Now Mr. Lee told me it's his final mission to see the remains of his family and his neighbors restored to respect, one final sign of dignity.
The people who were sacrificed here should all be cremated and buried together, or a museum should be built to show people what happened.
Beyond everyone remembering the history of what happened with your father and other people, I wonder what the lesson you want them to learn is.
The lesson that is valuable is that this kind of war should never happen again. Picking who lives and dies because of an insignificant ideology is just not right.
And just for a little context, that is one of about 160 confirmed sites across South Korea that Shin tells me up to 1 million people are believed to have been murdered during the Korean War. Many of those families say they're still pressing to the government for answers and action, including Sung-Bun Lee. He runs the Bereaved Family Association of the Korean War. We're talking about a subject that is decades old, but it's still fresh for many families. Thousands and thousands of families across South Korea, including yours, who feel that during the Korean War, their loved ones were killed unjustifiably. Could you tell me about your grandfather?
My grandfather was killed at the end of July 1950 with the prisoners at Daegu Correctional Facility. My grandfather was the head of the labor union. The reason why he got killed dates back to the protests of October 1946. At that time, because of economic problems, the protesters demanded food and fair treatment of workers.
It seems in your family that, I don't know if targeting is the right word, but that this was somewhat generational. Later on, your father was actually imprisoned.
My father and others who lost family during the war demanded answers and formed the Bereaved Family Association, and my father was one of the most prominent members. After the coup of May 1961, the new government arrested members of the association without any legal basis. This was the second time they tied a rope around the dog's neck.
How big was this?
At that time, the population was around 23 million. Out of that 23 million, 1 million were killed. That's 5% of the population, and most of them were young leaders. For 70 years after the war, of course it was forgotten. Plus, many military dictators followed and suppressed the memory so these people won't be remembered. Those victims' families were blocked from many opportunities because they were deemed guilty by association.
You know, we've seen some of these sites where there have been mass murders, where they've pulled up craniums and dusted off shoes and tried to find family members who maybe match with them. Yet many people feel like that's not enough. You represent a lot of families across this country who want something done. What is it that you want to see done?
I want a sincere apology on behalf of the nation, a complete revelation of the truth about what happened, and to hold the perpetrators accountable. Those are the things the bereaved families want.
Mr. Lee, thank you for sharing your story, your family's story, and your mission. Thank you.
Thank you. Some incredible insights there, putting a lot into perspective, especially for future generations. A lot more ahead tonight on a special edition of The Why, including a conversation with a North Korean defector. But first, let's send it to Jay in Chicago for a look at what else is making news tonight. Hey, Jay.
Thanks again, Chance. And some other stories we're following tonight back home, starting with some major news in the world of media. A district court judge approved AT&T's $85 billion takeover of Time Warner today. AT&T announced plans to buy Time Warner in 2016 in what would be a huge merger of two media giants. The Justice Department sued to block the merger, saying it would hurt competition and innovation. But after a 6-week trial, the judge rejected the government's argument today. He said its evidence in the case was too thin. Now that the courts okayed this merger, other major media companies are likely to try and join together. AT&T expects to close the deal by June 20th. Voters in 5 states headed to the polls today for primary elections. People in Nevada, North Dakota, Maine, South Carolina, and Virginia will determine their general election candidates. There are open governor races in South Carolina and Nevada. Last week, President Trump tweeted his support for current South Carolina Governor Henry McMaster. In Virginia, Democrats are hoping to flip several House seats, including GOP Congresswoman Barbara Comstock's. Hillary Clinton won her district in 2016. President Trump's top economic advisor, Larry Kudlow, is recovering in a hospital outside Washington, D.C. after having a mild heart attack yesterday. Mr. Trump announced Kudlow's heart attack on Twitter shortly before his meeting with Kim Jong-un. The White House says he's doing well, and they expect him to return to his position as director of the National Economic Council. Today marks 2 years since the Pulse nightclub shooting in Orlando, Florida. It's one of the deadliest mass shootings in modern U.S. history, with 49 people killed. The nightclub remains permanently closed as a memorial for the victims. Yesterday, Florida Governor Rick Scott declared June 12th Pulse Remembrance Day. Up next, Chance is back in Seoul talking with a North Korean defector. What does he think about this summit, and would he ever return to the country he fled? That's coming up in 2 minutes. Welcome back to this special edition of The Why. Yesterday, President Trump made history when he shook hands with North Korean leader Kim Jong-un. Kim is considered one of the most oppressive leaders in the world, prompting some North Koreans to leave his reclusive country. So where do they go? Well, South Korea. Chance Seals is back with us now from Seoul. Chance?
Jay, amid this city of nearly 10 million lives tens of thousands of people who escaped or defected from North Korea. Their stories are all different, but there is one common thread. They just wanted to live, and freely. We're about to bring you the story of a 31-year-old named Min Kang. He grew up watching the people around him starve to death. Now he makes his living in Seoul designing websites. Ironic considering the fact that the internet is still banned back home. Min, you're 32 years old, living in the middle of Seoul, South Korea, but your life did not begin here. I want to start at the beginning in North Korea. Could you give me a sense of where you were born, what life was like there?
I was born in Pukchong County, South Hamgyong Province. Where I was born, the streams of water were clear and beautiful. But when I was around 10 in my hometown, a lot of kids like me starved to death. And I've seen a lot of horrible images like that. It's a truly beautiful place, but I've seen a lot of hardships.
What was your life personally like? Like in your home, in your family, what was day-to-day life like?
My mother would travel around the country, carrying merchandise and trying to sell it door to door. Her family would take care of me while she was traveling, so I'd hang out with my cousins and nephews, but we didn't have anything to eat. So I went to the mountains and became a logger. That's how I bought food.
Were you aware of the outside world? When you heard all the propaganda of, the great leader and these horrible people out there that want to kill you and bomb you and oppress you, did you believe that? Were there whispers that maybe wasn't true?
The propaganda praising the Kim family and negative words about the outside world. Unlike what the North Korean government says, people are aware that it's not true. I was moved by a movie like Titanic. People watch a lot of TV shows and soap operas, and people think pop culture is cool. They follow the fashion. No matter what the North Korean government says, it's totally unrelated to the actual daily lives of citizens.
As a young man, you decided to, some people use the word defect, others use the word escape. How'd you do it? Why'd you do it?
I started earning money for myself at 15. Until I was 20, I sold anything that could make a profit. When I was 20, I got scammed by someone I trusted like a brother. So I went to China to make money. I went there to start from scratch. It was there that I saw the outside world. That made me think I need to go to South Korea.
You were born in North Korea, where even today, 2018, the internet is illegal. Yet, we're sitting in the middle of a tech incubator, which could be in Silicon Valley, happens to be in Seoul, and now you're a tech entrepreneur. That's pretty cool.
It's even fascinating for me that I'm doing this. I defected, went to China, and I was connected to the internet for the first time. When I saw that, I saw the possibility of the internet, where the entire world is connected. Thinking of who I was in North Korea, I look back and I feel like a different person, like a stranger.
You mentioned your mother's family, who you're very close to, and I assume you have more family back home. Do you know how they're doing? Because this regime has a history of punishing those who are related to defectors.
Thankfully, I don't have immediate family in North Korea, so I can tell my story. If it is known that you've defected to South Korea, recently the punishment has gotten worse, and they send the entire family to concentration camps. I've been hearing these stories time to time. The parents of one of my close friends got sent to a concentration camp. They just cry and cry. I know a lot of people with those experiences. Their families were sent away. You don't return from a concentration camp. They sometimes wipe out your entire family.
The thing I'm wondering about is the future. Because your story shows there is no telling what the future is. Right now, the North and South are trying yet again to form this relationship and open up channels and possibly even travel. I wonder if you would ever consider moving back home one day if things were to change. Or is that not home anymore?
I really want to go back home. I really want to go back as soon as I can. I want to go back and do something. There's one thing that bothers me after coming to South Korea. I feel guilty about the people back home because I enjoy so much freedom. Sometimes I have vivid dreams about going to North Korea. I know the trip could kill me and it's dangerous, but I want to go. I even want to go right now. Right now, Kim Jong-un and Trump are trying to have a summit, but if you look at the North Korean state media, they're using this meeting to consolidate their power and elevate Kim Jong-un as a leader praised all over the world. People from the outside world, people like me or others, should take action. For example, just like other civic groups, you can put rice in a plastic bottle, and when the current flows north, it will arrive on their coasts, or smuggle in good quality information about the outside world. In fact, those things have been changing North Korea and perceptions about the outside world. People who encounter that information share it with family and loved ones, and that's how North Korea has changed. I believe these are the things we should continue.
Man, your story is astounding, but even more so, I'd say, is your spirit. I appreciate you sharing it with us. Thank you.
Thank you.
Another issue people are dealing with here in Seoul is the cost of living. It is everywhere that people talk about this because it's super expensive to live here. One popular type of housing is called goshtel, or one-room housing. You pay a monthly rent and you're given in exchange one room to live in. And these rooms can be tiny. I talked with a photographer who went inside these rooms. He lived inside some of them and has some incredible pictures and stories to tell. Kyudong, you have made quite a big statement here in Seoul, South Korea, with some of your pictures, but they're all placed in these tiny spots. How did that all get started?
I had been living in these places called goshtel for a few years, so I took these living conditions to be normal. Other people think of them as temporary spots to live while they study for exams to become high-ranking government workers. But after living there for a while, I learned there are a lot of people who've been living in the goshtel for a long time. A lot of people don't know about that, so I felt like I needed to spread awareness.
So you began to wonder, will I be living here long term? And maybe there are all these other people in the same position. Why were you living there at the time?
I needed a temporary place to stay when I came from my hometown Gangneung. At other places, you have to search for, have a security deposit, and sign a rental contract. Those things are complicated, but at the Goshtel, it's easy to move in.
We've been here for a week at this point, and this keeps coming up over and over and over, that so many young people are in this position to where they can't get the housing they once thought they were going to be able to afford or aspire to live in. You bring this home by showing the images. What sorts of things do you show in your pictures?
My intention was not, I want to take pictures of these poor people. I just wanted to say, this is also a place where people live. Some people are content, and I want to show that these people exist, which many don't know about. There's a photo I took from the ceiling so I could show exactly how small the room is. I've taken pictures of around 6 to 7 people. I wanted to take more, but most of my neighbors didn't feel comfortable.
Photography is a special medium, and it's actually intimate many times, especially in tight quarters. Was it difficult to get these people to allow you into their homes, that sometimes you're standing this close taking a picture?
The people there really didn't like me taking pictures. I lived there before, so I knew that if people came to my living space to take pictures, I would say no. So I understood that. I couldn't even get the camera out to hold in front of them for at least a couple months, probably 6 months. But there was a common room, and I'd make connections with them, which brought us closer. And then people saw me taking photos of the area, so I got to explain my photography hobby and got their permission. I think that was the hardest part of the whole project.
Have any of your former roommates, and I'm sure current friends, given you any feedback and said how they felt like they were portrayed? Were they happy with it?
Some were embarrassed to see their photos going public. Some were indifferent. They were like, whatever, yeah, sure. Some were impressed. They said they were proud of me.
Have you been surprised at how much this resonated? I'm guessing when you were taking pictures as part of this project, you didn't think it makes such a big impact.
After taking these photos, I thought a lot about how I should make them public, maybe in an exhibition. I thought a lot and then sort of gave it up. Then it just worked out coincidentally. It got way more attention than I thought it would. So I think it was luck.
Kyudong, congrats on the project. You certainly have made an impact. I appreciate it. Thank you.
Thank you.
By the way, he's now back living in his hometown, but tells me he wants to continue telling the stories of those who are rarely seen or heard. All right, a quick break, then our special coverage of the Trump-Kim summit continues. We look at how we got to this moment in history when we return from Seoul. This is The Why. Welcome back to Newsy's special coverage of the U.S.-North Korea summit. I'm Chance Seals in Seoul. Understanding context and history is so important in moments especially like these. We didn't get here with one handshake or one tweet. So let's take a few minutes to look back at how President Trump and Kim Jong-un went from threats of annihilation to a full-blown diplomatic reception. Donald Trump took an interest in North Korea well before taking the oath of office. Spring 2013 saw a rush of tweets out of Trump Tower, dinging China for taking it easy on the regime, smacking South Korea for not paying for American defenses, denouncing President Obama for going wobbly-kneed in the presence of adversaries. Trump's prescription? More muscle. This tweet in April 2013, just months into Obama's second term. Our president must be very careful with the 28-year-old whack job in North Korea. At some point, we may have to get very tough, blatant threats. Once he formally jumped into the 2016 presidential race, Mr. Trump made a habit out of both buttering up and dressing down world leaders. It would be a game changer, he promised. The key was to charm these leaders when possible and punch when necessary.
I would get China to make that guy disappear in one form or another very quickly. And let me tell you, people say,
how do you make him disappear and assassinate him?
Let me just tell you, no, well, you know, I've heard of worse things, frankly. I mean, this guy's a bad dude, and don't underestimate him. Any young guy can take over from his father with all those generals and everybody else that probably want the position. This is not somebody to be underestimated.
The man who made his name in hard-nosed, high-dollar Manhattan was certain that his know-how, his negotiating skills, were going to be the missing piece. He hinted a summit might work.
One of the papers called the other day, and they said, "Would you speak to the leader of North Korea?" I said, "Absolutely. Why not? Why not?" And they come out, "Trump would speak to him." Who the hell cares? I'll speak to anybody.
The path to talks has been tumultuous. President Trump took office January 20th, 2017. Weeks later, the heat was already cranking up.
North Korea firing off a ballistic missile into the Sea of Japan, confirmed as the president was hosting Japan's prime minister at the time at Mar-a-Lago.
Unbowed, North Korea tested one missile after the next. CNBC put together this timeline. All the launches during President Trump's first year in office. Some successful, some not. Then July 4th, 2017. Kim launched an intercontinental ballistic missile, an ICBM, capable of reaching the United States. The next day, Trump's UN ambassador Nikki Haley responded.
The United States does not seek conflict. In fact, we seek to avoid it. We seek only the peaceful denuclearization of the Korean Peninsula and an end to the threatening actions by North Korea. Regrettably, we're witnessing just the opposite. Make no mistake, North Korea's launch of an ICBM is a clear and sharp military escalation.
The Kim regime kept shooting off at the mouth and into the air, while in the south, a new government led by President Moon Jae-in was taking shape. Moon based his campaign in part on engaging with Pyongyang. Meanwhile, the Trump team led the UN Security Council, including Russia and China, to pass new sanctions on North Korea. So while Haley worked to cut off Pyongyang from the rest of the world, President Trump reached for his go-to weapon, verbal threats.
He has been very threatening, beyond a normal statement. And as I said, they will be met with fire, fury, and frankly power, the likes of which this world has never seen before.
3 days later, he tweeted, "Military solutions are now fully in place, locked and loaded, should North Korea act unwisely." And in September, Trump spoke to the United Nations General Assembly.
The United States has great strength and patience. But if it is forced to defend itself or its allies, we will have no choice but to totally destroy North Korea. Rocket Man is on a suicide mission for himself and for his regime.
Moon Jae-in had been president of South Korea for less than a year. He had major promises of de-escalation to fulfill. Caught between his diplomatic partner and his geographic brother, Moon set out on a peacemaking mission. As an opening bid, he invited North Korea to participate in the 2018 Winter Olympics in South Korea. The next month, in March, Moon's emissary to the United States came with a proposition conveyed directly to and accepted unilaterally by President Trump, who then sent the South Korean official out onto the White House driveway to make the announcement.
President Trump appreciated the briefing and said he would meet Kim Jong-un by May to achieve permanent denuclearization.
The U.S. president had agreed to meet with North Korea's leader for the first time ever. In April, another history-making moment. President Moon met Kim Jong-un in person at the DMZ. Meanwhile, the date of the Trump-Kim meeting was set, June 12th, and public statements stayed fairly sunny between the two nations. Kim released the last Americans held prisoner in North Korea.
Kim Jong-un did a great service. We're going to make a great deal for the world.
As June got closer, Kim made a surprise trip to meet with Chinese President Xi Jinping. Suddenly, and no one's really revealed why, North Korea appeared to backtrack on its previous pledges, including denuclearization. And the United States and South Korea continued their joint military exercises, a major issue in Pyongyang. And North Korea called Vice President Mike Pence a political dummy for making the suggestion that Pyongyang could go the way of Libya, and warning, quote, "Whether the U.S. will meet us at a meeting room or encounter us at nuclear-to-nuclear showdown is entirely dependent upon the decision and behavior of the United States." It welcomed reporters to its only known nuclear test site and blew some of it up though it appears that that was mostly for show, and some important equipment and tunnels may still be usable. Days later, May 24th, with less than a month to go, Mr. Trump canceled the meeting, writing a personal letter to Kim and posting it on Twitter. That's when South Korea's president had his second sit-down with Kim, hoping to save the summit. Then, North Korea's former spy chief, Kim Jong-un, made his way to the United States. First to New York, where he met with Secretary of State Mike Pompeo. Then to Washington with a giant game show-sized envelope from Kim Jong-un with a secret message. Kim says he's committed to denuclearization, but his definition appears to be significantly different from Trump's.
The letter that we're signing is very comprehensive, and I think both sides are going to be very impressed with the result. A lot of goodwill went into this, a lot of work, a lot of preparation. I want to thank everybody on both sides, Secretary Pompeo and all of his counterparts. They were absolutely fantastic.
More to come from here in Seoul, including a unique look at a group of girls who are crazy about street dance. They call themselves the Dusty Red Crew. We're back from Seoul after this. Welcome back to Seoul and Newsy's continuing special coverage of the Trump-Kim summit. As we near the end of this hour, we wanted to take a minute to profile a group of young college students. They're dazzling audiences across this city of millions, but also on social media. They call themselves the Dusty Red Crew.
How we express the music and how we feel the music, that comes through our movements, I think. Our team is a hip-hop crew, and we all go to university. We study each different subjects, but we all are a part of like the street dance community of university students, and that's how we met. So we made this crew Dusty Red, and our name comes from a color. It's like dark red. Then we're just like looking names, and then we thought Dusty Red was pretty cool. Like, yeah, that's how our name was. My college life was all about dance. It's like how much we love dance, how much we like this culture. So it's more than a hobby to us. Step Up was that was the first movie actually handling about dance, street dance. So to me it was really it was actually shocking, people dancing on the streets like that. I saw that movie before I started street dance, so that was really shocking. I thought it was really cool.
What do your parents think about your dancing?
Very hate.
Very hate.
Actually, my parents love.
Really?
Yes, they support me.
Okay, so your parents are fans, your parents are not. They love their daughter, but maybe not your dancing?
Yeah.
Okay?
Now it's cheer up. Now cheer up.
Now. 2 years ago, very hate.
And study. It's not about competing, it's more about sharing and enjoying. Yeah, it's like another culture.
What is the culture here? What are you saying, borrowing, appreciating?
It's a lot different from the mainstream culture because we share this street culture, which is can be hip hop because we're a hip hop crew. It can be hip hop. It's more really free, and we're not I don't want to be a professional dancer, and it's actually too late for us, but we still want to keep that hobby till whenever.
Anything better than you.
Talented group, huh? And they're just one more example of how life does go on here in Seoul. As we've told you and shown you this hour, people here are used to living under the threat of war. They're used to an erratic neighbor to the north. What they are not used to is the possibility of peace. By the way, South Korea is about to hold local elections tomorrow. There are signs plastering the city. And we're told in virtually every area, the liberal candidates who support engagement with the North are likely to win, even in spots traditionally run by conservatives. So we're going to have to see how this all plays out in the days, weeks, months, even years ahead. I'm Shan Seals in Seoul, South Korea. For now, Jay, we'll send it back to you in Chicago.
Chance, thank you, and thanks for joining us on this special edition of The Why.